place. This is going to be a fun client-side search talk. This is not going to be a very super scientific talk, so if you're a data person, kind of just don't make fun of me. But hopefully this is just going to be more of a topic of interest in trying to figure out like what the extent is of what we can get away with and when it's going to be useful for us. So first, my name is Dan. I'm a developer of Obomo and an engineering manager here. And a lot of what I do is managing technical things and people and getting to give advice on technologies. One of the things that we've been interested in, but we haven't actually been able to roll out, is a lot of client-side search. So this comes up a lot, and we've done a lot of thinking on it. But I think we got more thinking to go. So I wanted to start off by just asking everyone who's familiar with search. If is everyone using Solr or Elasticsearch to power any of their architecture? Mm-hmm. And has anyone tried to move off of backend search, either getting rid of search or move into like a third-party service like search.gov? Because those are right now basically the only viable options. So we're going to be looking at what happens when I try and index about 10,000 documents. Now what I've done is I've looked at several different methods of getting this data, starting with basic HTML, stripping it down to, I'll have some more slides on it later, but different variations of extracting the content from it so we can see what it looks like. I've scraped about 10,000 live government websites. So the data that I'm dealing with is the same wording that's live now on the sites and the same verbiage and the same size, and they're, so it's gonna match up pretty well, hopefully. All right, so what I decided to do is see what happens when you trim down the source material. So while we're generating these indexes on the client side, we're going to be interested in whether we can keep any markdown content in them, whether we can just keep the text as is, or whether we need to do anything to the text to make it usable or interesting. And here's the starting point we have. What happens if you do 10 documents? And you can see here, across all these different types of things, we might be interested in some advanced filtering and faceting and stuff like that, and how much data do you have to play with? Well, 10 items is nothing, but it gets you the basics of how these systems get set up and what they have to do with. So if you did want to do something related to filtering content in a drop-down or an autocomplete or stuff like that, and you're dealing with tens of documents, you're dealing with next to no data, so it doesn't really matter what technology is behind that. They're all going to be very reasonable to play with. All right, and some of the other things we're interested in is, why are we doing this anyway? Well, there's two main things. One, client-side search is very fast, or should be, and number two, it's not very expensive for you. It's essentially free. You don't need host servers. You don't need host architectures. And it doesn't necessarily have to even be replacing all of the search on your site, but it's something that can be kind of dealt with as long as you can stay within these compact index sizes and you're kind of aware of what data sets you're working with. So we're also going to be looking at character matching and vector matching. And so, I'm not going to mansplain vectors to you guys. I'm assuming everyone knows. If anyone would like a vector explanation, you can raise your hand. Otherwise, I'll just kind of assume we're all on the same page. All right. So when we're dealing with what do we have to play with, we run into two different scenarios. We're always going to be in a browser in these, but we are going to be either on a desktop or on mobile. So really, we have a lot of room to play with. These are the limits for the individual per page memory capacities of how much memory they allocate for each page to use. And so we're dealing in the tens of megabytes, if nothing else. So as long as we stay under that, that means whether we like it or not, it should be technically possible to use these type of things. So the first one we're going to look at is a commercial product. Well, technically it's I think it's open source as well. But there's a mini search which generates these client-side indexes for you based off your data. And if we look at, I'm comparing two things here. One is just the baseline text, which is everything, all the content words extracted from a web page without any surrounding HTML or Markdown. And then we have the reduced, where we go through and we try and strip out some words and stem. We go through a lot of the basic filtering down procedures to get rid of as many unimportant words as we can. And if we look at kind of where we end up with this, you can see we go, we're in those limits. So if we try and get rid of words, we can see generally it cuts down the indexes by half, but we can hit 10,000 items. And 25 megs is not a very happy web page, but it is technically within the limits that we were talking about. So the 1,000 is two's still pretty bad when it comes down to it, but there are pages that have a lot of stuff on them. So that's not really unheard of. So hopefully what we're looking at here is a sweet spot somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 seems to be in a range where this might be useful. And then I have a little bit of these broken up. This helps kind of explain some other things too. This is now self-generated vector indexes. These are stored as JSON files, but the vector numbers themselves have been base64 encoded, so they're kind of compact to some extent. And you can see the range, again, 10, absolutely nothing, all the way to 10,000, 15 megabytes, still within that region. So, there are lots of government sites with more than 10,000 pages, but especially if you're even into sections of pages, oftentimes, they can be broken up into smaller bits, so it's possible to have targeted search, within that range, just by doing full 32-bit vectors. If we decide to quantize the stuff down a little bit, which just, in this case, it just means hacking off some decimal places, you get some, well, not the worst results in the world, but you do get less specific results. But now we've dropped down our sizes by quite a lot. Yeah. And so that is still the worst case scenario, 3.8 megs, that's pretty big, but that's still not undoable, especially if we're considering the case here where these are going to apply to every page on the site. So you're not adding per page just once. And there's some interesting things like mini-search does where it can break up the JSON indexes into multiple files so they download in parallel and download faster and they're still cacheable. So, getting it down to this level still is within reach of what I think is pretty reasonable for us to make use of. We can go even lower. We can get the 4-bit quantization. Now this makes the data not the best. We start getting now bad search results. So we're down to, I don't think I have this statistics up, but we're about maybe a 30% failure rate where we know there's a result in the system, and now we have started to miss them. I think actually, I didn't say about the 8-bit, but it was about 95. So unless you're doing the full vector index with the big numbers, you are going to lose some amount of results is what you're trading off for this. But again, if you can get 10,000 pages for a full site search down to a meg or under a meg, then it's pretty good. The most we can tear out of this thing and still have it be somewhat usable is just doing binary. So instead of every vector space being an integer that's so many characters long, it's just a 0 or a 1. Now we get down really low, 10,000 pages, but this is next to useless, but it is just showing the extent of the. This will find stuff, so it's possible to actually, the use case for this is using it as a first step. Caching gets stuff free, finds stuff other places cheaper. Well, it's possible for this to find stuff for you, and if it doesn't, you can then, pass it back on to real search that's expensive. So if we're looking at the general size ranges of these things, I mean, they're they're equivalent to each other, they stay fairly regular, and they provide at least some sort of results. So I want to pause here just real quick to kind of do audience engagement stuff and just ask if working with files around half a megabyte is just a no-go for any of the projects you've been on. Do any of you guys have rules or regulation standards for what you would and would not be allowed to use, or is reasonable or not reasonable to use? All right, then I'm going to assume no one wants to do 15 megabytes, but you could. A little bit of technical details here behind what the vectors do and what they are. There's two types of vectors here. I was using the dense vectors for my calculations. There's sparse vectors. They stay closer, like in vector space, they stay closer to the words. So they will be doing matching for you from the point of view of a keyword match. Normally that's offloaded, that's not a vector issue. You let something else, they do a hybrid search where you do character matching and you do vector concept matching. But in here, we're dealing with the technically the big ones. So we're not going to be as good at doing the keyword matching for these things. So if someone's coming in and they're typing questions into your website, vague things they need to know, or the vague stuff they need to do, and you want to get on the topic, then the dense vectors would help you if you want to do keyword matching. It's possible to actually do both. All right, so the hybrid models, and if you like in theory, what this is supposed to do is open up varying levels of almost similar to the caching setup we have, where you have various steps you go through before you get to the heavier and heavier stuff on the back end. So, if you don't need as much precision, you can definitely use some of these smaller things. And if you do need all that semantic understanding, you can use some of the large vector models, and then you get all that. And then even, once you get it to the client, it's there. It's, cost-free for you. One of the biggest things that makes people interested in this is just the cost. I mean, you could blow tens of thousands of dollars a month on large indexing services in the background, and that could add up to quite a bit of money over the course of a year. So doing this, really, it's a return on investment type deal. You don't have to. You can spend your money, your time elsewhere. You don't have to keep fixing your Solr 9 upgrade over and over and over again. All right, so here's another just statistics on kind of the size reduction you get from all this stuff. So we can go down, pretty quick. Even the in8 goes down pretty quick on this thing. All right, so for some of this stuff, this is more on the analysis, like cost, like what you're replacing, end. So you're still going to need some sort of indexing service, because in this scenario, we're talking about these index sets we generated. So every time, in the same way right now, you update data in Drupal, and then Drupal has to go tell Elasticsearch about it. Same thing's going to happen. It's going to have to have new data in the system. Some backend process is going to have to know about that, regenerate, rebuild these indexes, and then push them out to make them available. So you do have a slightly different pipeline for managing your data and getting it deployed and scaled. And then, this is just massively more performant. That's the basic punchline. As long as you're willing to trade off some of the specificity and features that we're going for. So what does this mean? Because I've been throwing numbers. I tried to use the ChatGPT icons. And, what is it good for? Anything, 1 to 100 pages, small enough, it doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want. Use the big thing because it's going to be pretty. But as you go on, in the thousands range, you start saying, well, is it really worth it? You should be asking yourself that question. And then, honestly, once you're at 10,000 plus, unless you really want to optimize stuff at this level, you're probably better off sticking with a server-side approach. Now, this all depends, because you may not even have a server-side if you're trying to look at get rid of your server-side. But the performance, starts getting up to less than, or above half a millisecond response times for some of those large searches, and that's roughly when people start noticing a pause. All right, so for instance, in my testing, I ran all of these different types and sorts of queries. So you can see I categorize them. What are people looking for? What are they asking for? What type of things would they be trying to get? And most of these things were, proof that the keyword search might not find it, but the semantic encoded information in the vector searches would find these things. All right, so like I brought up the content update frequency, if you don't have very high update frequency, it becomes a much better solution. If you don't have complex data, and I mean lots of different indexes on your data with lots of different, extras where you're bumping up certain fields and you're doing all sorts of stuff to it. Privacy, you're going to have to dump essentially all of your content in some form or another on the user. So most government public websites, that's totally fine. They'd love that. But it does become an issue because you do have to be slightly careful about what you're packaging up. All right, and as always, this is not one size fits all. It's more of hopefully a little bit of a talk about what the possibilities are and when it's useful for you guys, but use cases may vary. Like I started off with, we haven't really implemented this across the sites yet, so we haven't run into some of the real world bottlenecks that we might find. And then, of course, I tested it with a sampling of data. If we were, for instance, to pick some sort of Missouri fishery site or something like that, we would be able to get much better results off doing an analysis of that specific data set and those specific stuff. So that's it. It's a fairly short talk, but for where we're going, I'll be done, and I will open up to any questions or interest you have.
So you talked about you still have to generate that index, right, and then publish it for the client side to consume. How long and how much processing power does generating that index for say 10,000 documents? Like how long does it?
Oh, they're all under 1 second.
Oh.
Well, this is assuming you have direct access to the data.
Okay.
So but just to actually produce those vectors is very fast, very cheap, very easy.
Okay. And what is the tech stack there? Is it like a more or less a shell script that generates it? Or?
Yeah, the code I used was a Node app, but it used some open vector library. So basically, you download a small LLM that is specifically, for for encoding these things, the transformers, and then it can tell you what your vectors are for the stuff. So for instance, when someone types in a search query, it's also got to vectorize that. So one of the issues that I didn't talk about that you have is you need to make sure that you're using a tool set that on the back end, the libraries are the same as you can push to the browser's front end. Because if they generate different index, they use slightly different math, they could, mismatch to some extent.
So the browsers don't have any kind of native vector store?
No, they don't. Because to them it's just a big
blob.
Yeah, big blob. It's a linear algebra equation, so they just take a huge list of floating points and then put it in memory.
One of the talks earlier was they were talking about how AI is slamming websites with doing all this searching and stuff and indexing and if you have search, it's very problematic because it has to be done on the server. Mm-hmm. You got all these different parameters that make for all these different permutations that the search doesn't know that stuff doesn't exist. Is this going to help where an AI is coming in and trying to
to some extent
suggest your site?
This doesn't have the raw content, so just like for this, I'm interested in taking all the content, extracting it off the web pages, and then doing something with it. The AIs are going to be interested in that. So they're probably not going to use the same transformers that we're using.
Okay, yeah.
So they might not want our vectors. They might want to make their own. But if there was a standard type vector thing that people put, then yeah, they could just take that. It's possible because we're dumping essentially all of our content. It would make it a lot larger, but it's possible to formulate these things in a way where the AI, when it comes to scrape your site, doesn't care about your site. It just wants your data. If it's ready for it, sure. So,
well, even if there's a mismatch, I'm still thinking the fact if you're dumping your search off of the back end, where that's where the hit is coming from, the AI coming in and all this huge stuff.
Definitely, especially if what it's doing is if it wants to scrape your whole site, it's going to get everything. If it's interested in a certain topic, then it might go through your search to find all those things in your topic. And now you've dumped that off, and so the AI itself, its little browser it's scraping on, is going to take over all the searching and processing related to that. Yeah.
So you mentioned indexes within a second, you have access to the data. What, if any, what format do you provide the data in? Can you just give it a bunch of HTML files and then just does it from there, or do you have to do some kind of pre-processing to get it to index?
Well, so a little bit of both. Yes, you could index the raw HTML file if you wanted, but then in the vectors, it's going to include all the tags and all the stuff. So you might be interested in that. For I think what most people would use search for, they're probably just interested in the content. So I had to go and try and identify what is the visible content that a reader would read on this website and kind of include that. So yeah, you would have to do some amount of pre-processing on the pages, most likely, but it would probably be simple.
Gotcha. And since we're at a Drupal conference, I gotta ask, has anybody tried to implement this as like a Drupal module?
So yes, there are the two. There's Flex Search, there's Mini Search, there's Lunar was one. It's not anymore. There's a bunch of these different modules, and people have written Drupal plugins that use them. So they work within the Search API, they work within the Drupal interface, and from your point of view, you don't even know that it's doing this. And they generate the indexes and they generate the HTML and they put them up there. So yes, it can kind of be hidden from the user, because from their point of view, it's going to activate a box on top of your header somewhere, and it doesn't know or care what that actually does, and it doesn't have to go back to the server. It can be managed by by a module to send the search to the front end client. So you run into the scenario where you got that one big upfront download, and then nothing on the other pages.
Right. Is there a capability to like Solr and stuff, you can have it index the content of PDFs and Word documents. Is that a capability with this stuff, or no? Could it be?
So it could be, because you're stuck in that same extraction process. If you have a PDF and you want to extract the text from it, sure. You then hand it off, because all this is doing is taking, it's just a one-to-one mapper. It's taking a URL path and mapping it to a vector, right? So at this point in time, that path might not be an HTTP path. It could just be a file path or the HTTP path to the PDF. It doesn't really care, but as long as you pick what you want to get extracted from it, then yes, it can apply to everything. I did not include any of that data in here because I was mostly just focused on web page content. I figured it would blow my statistics away if I, got some NIST documentation.
Right. Yeah.
Is this the wave of the future? Are we
maybe.
Are we going to be able to say goodbye?
Well, if pricing becomes a major thing and people don't want to host more and more stuff, then this is definitely going to be, this type of thing is going to be in the works for money saving reasons. And like I said, even if it doesn't replace all of your search, it's possible if you can offload 50% of your search, it's not going to help it will help your monthly bill. So if you could identify some searches that could be offloaded to the front end and save your server all the time, then great. And I think maybe through some, if people wanted to actually use this and play around with it and expand on it and kind of use it to its full extent, then doing something like pushing off table sorting to something like this and pushing out, there could be all sorts of like in-page data that that could use the same basic API, like search API interface where you just tell it, hey, I got something that needs to be searched, and it can take care of it for you. So it's possible smaller bits of data could, 10K, 12K for a thing, that's no big deal. So maybe you put your nav menu, your full site architecture, information architecture, menu, and that's not tens of thousands of items, it's just a little bit. Any other interesting things anyone has to share? Has anyone messed around with trying to do anything related to offloading things onto the client? Have an opinion on whether it was a terrible idea?
Well, there's competing. You're competing for that space on your minimum viable device, right? So whatever the lower level limit is. And one of the things that's eating a lot of that is, large JavaScript libraries that people are using, probably inappropriately, things they don't really need, but it's there. And so that's going to be in competition with, how good your search can be, how big this package can be. Is it going to blow up at some point? Like, what's going to get left behind if the browser has to choose between this search index?
Well, from the relevancy point of view, this extra data that the user is not going to see on your page,
yes,
it's a candidate for being left behind. But at the same time, you're going to be going against people who like to calculate money. And so if you say, yeah, it's going to be an inconvenience to the user and take up some space we could be using for other content, but you're going to pay a lot less of a bill, then I think that's going to be an argument that is going to work out.
Yeah, that's true.
I guess one of the solutions is search.gov, right, for offloading it. But
yeah, I mentioned that in one of my first slides. So people who don't, like for instance, USA.gov is a fully static site, and they have full complex search. But they do that by allowing a third-party service to come in, like Google. It's a government-run thing, but I don't know if you guys are familiar with search.gov. But they scrape the USA.gov site, they index the content, and then when you click the search box, it goes back to them and then back. So it is a third-party service, and it's kind of, technologically, it's not like this, but from the program manager's point of view, it's in this space of solutions. It makes someone else do it.
I guess one of the problems with it though is you lose control over the theming a lot of the time because you have two options. It either takes you externally to their site or it injects the results into your body, into your HTML. You can't template it.
Yeah, it tends to look very limited. They just give you some vague control over some of the CSS and the little header image. So
yeah, so if there was a way to do that, but also still retain full control over theming or whatever,
yeah, there's something like this would definitely, because you're not ever going to leave the site. So it would have to be paired up with a little bit of front end theming though, because you're not going back to Drupal to ask Drupal's stack to render anything for you. So you're going to have the viable templates for result sets declared for you.
You can still template each result row.
Yeah.
Was it integrated with the Use API at all?
I have not seen one that does with this, but there's no reason why you couldn't, theoretically. So if you wanted to develop something specific like this for Drupal based around the client-side stuff, I think that's what you would do, is you would write essentially plugins for your module that talk to Views API and talk to Search API and just told it about that stuff. And like I said, there are examples out there that do that and do some of these things related to the day-to-day management, breaking up the files, et cetera, listening to the right hooks so you know when to generate them. So there's some groundwork that's been done. All right, if that's everything, we can be done for today. Thank you.